In 1987, Australians marched in the streets to defeat the Australia card and its promise of total surveillance. Now, after the Optus and Medibank hacks exposed the private data of almost every citizen, the government has made its move, paving the way for a digital ID law that goes further than anything before. What changed, and why is 2026 the year privacy, as you know it, may finally end? Bob Hawke's government faced a tidal wave of resistance in 1987 when the Australia card proposal landed on the public agenda. The idea, a single national identity number linking every citizen to tax, health, and welfare, sparked protests in every capital city. More than 1 million signatures flooded Parliament and headlines warned of a surveillance state. The backlash was so fierce that the government abandoned the plan, shelving the card just months after a bruising election. For many Australians, the memory of those marches lingered as a warning about government overreach and the dangers of centralised identity systems. Yet while the Australia card collapsed, the move toward digital records never really stopped. Medicare cards, first issued in 1984, became a fixture in wallets across the country. By the early 2000s, paper forms gave way to online portals. In 2013, the government launched MyGov, a single online account to access Centrelink, Medicare, and the Australian Tax Office. Then in 2018, MyGov ID arrived, allowing users to prove their identity through an app instead of a folder of documents. By 2024, over 13 million Australians had signed up, often without realising how far the system had evolved from the days of plastic cards and paper trails. This gradual shift, from street protests against a national ID to quiet adoption of digital credentials, reveals a deep tension. Fear of surveillance never disappeared, but convenience and the slow march of technology changed the way people interacted with the state. The question now is whether those old anxieties still hold power, or if the digital future has already arrived. In September 2022, Optus, one of Australia's largest telecom companies, announced that hackers had accessed the personal records of nearly 10 million customers. Names, birth dates, addresses, passport numbers, all suddenly exposed. Just weeks later, Medibank, the country's biggest health insurer, confirmed a second breach. This time, the fallout reached 9.7 million people, including sensitive medical histories. The cost of cleaning up the Medibank attack alone topped $180 million, with thousands forced to replace identity documents and face the risk of fraud for years to come. Headlines ran with stories of families scrambling to freeze their credit, while experts warned that the stolen data would circulate on the dark web for decades. The scale of these breaches was unprecedented for Australia. Nearly 20 million Australians, almost the entire adult population, found their identities at risk. Confidence in the old system of scattered, paper-based proofs collapsed almost overnight. Politicians faced a wave of angry calls and urgent questions in Parliament. Suddenly, the idea of a single, secure digital identity was no longer just a tech project. It became a political necessity. The narrative shifted. The problem was not government overreach, but the chaos and cost of leaving personal data vulnerable in the hands of dozens of companies. In the months that followed, the digital ID proposal moved from bureaucratic debate to the top of the national agenda, driven by the promise of security in a world where the next breach felt inevitable. On July 1st, 2024, the Australian Parliament gave legal force to the Digital ID Act, creating a new framework for identity in the digital era. The law comes into effect on December 1st, 2024, establishing a formal accreditation system for digital ID providers and spelling out the boundaries of participation. At the heart of the Act is a promise. No one can be forced to create or use a digital ID unless there is no reasonable alternative offered by the service provider. Section 74, often cited in debates, enshrines this voluntary principle, but leaves room for exceptions. The law does not set up a single national database of identities. Instead, it operates through a network of accredited providers, each required to meet strict privacy and security standards. The system is designed so that service providers cannot track where a person uses their digital ID or link their activities across different services. Only providers who meet the accreditation rules can participate, and their conduct is overseen by the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission. The Act's architecture rests on the idea of consent and control, but the fine print, especially around what counts as a reasonable alternative, remains a live issue. Across Australia, more than 10.5 million people have already signed up for a digital ID under the MyGov ID system. The government's investment in this infrastructure now exceeds 600 million Australian dollars, covering everything from cybersecurity upgrades to new verification protocols. Oversight is split between two powerful regulators, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, called ACCC, holds the authority to accredit providers, enforce compliance, and investigate breaches. Alongside them, the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner is charged with protecting privacy, handling complaints, and issuing penalties that can reach up to $50 million for serious violations. Section 38 of the Digital ID Act spells out strict limits on data sharing. Accredited providers cannot share your unique identifier or biometric details except in tightly defined circumstances, and only with your consent. Any provider caught misusing data or failing security standards can lose accreditation and face civil penalties. These guardrails, on paper, are designed to prevent the kind of sprawling access that led to the Optus and Medibank disasters. The system's scale and enforcement powers now set the stage for the next debate, whether these safeguards are enough to protect Australians as the network expands. Biometric scanning now sits at the centre of the government's argument for digital ID. By linking a face or fingerprint to official records, authorities claim they can stop identity theft before it starts. Finance Minister Katie Gallagher insists it is about putting the individual in control of their data. Supporters point to 500,000 plus new migrants processed each year, and the promise of faster, safer onboarding for banks and employers. Businesses no longer need to store copies of passports or driver's licenses, reducing the risk of another Optus-style breach. The government's pitch is clear: less paperwork, fewer hacks, and a digital key that only you can use. Yet privacy advocates see a different risk. They warn that connecting everything, banking, health, travel, to a single credential creates a tempting target for hackers. If the digital ID is compromised, the fallout could be total, locked accounts, lost access, and years of recovery. Civil liberties groups raise the spectre of debanking, where a person's digital identity could be suspended or restricted, cutting them off from work or finance. The law bans non-consensual data sharing, but critics argue that technical walls can fail and rules can change. The debate now circles a single question: does the system put power in the hands of the individual, or does it create a new kind of vulnerability? The steady disappearance of cash in Australia is more than a trend, it's a signal. Reserve Bank data shows that by 2026, less than 13% of all transactions are expected to use physical notes or coins. Every major bank now prepares for a future where tap and go, online transfers, and digital wallets are the default. Into this environment, the digital ID becomes the master key, unlocking not just government portals, but the entire financial system. Private sector accreditation scheduled for late 2026 means banks, real estate agents, and employers can require a verified digital identity to open accounts, sign leases, or start a new job. For new migrants, the stakes are even higher. The 2026 migration strategy is built around real-time tracking of visa status and work rights, all tied to a single digital credential. Compliance checks move from paperwork to instant database queries. The risk is not just exclusion for those without digital access. It is the possibility of a social financial profile, where spending habits, work history, and even carbon footprints are linked to a single ID. As the 2026 deadline approaches, opting out may no longer be a practical choice. The digital gate closes, and with it, the old ways of staying anonymous in daily life. Every click, Every transaction, every identity check now leaves a permanent trace. As Australia shifts from anonymity to algorithm, the real test is not technological, but democratic. The law is live. The consequences are unfolding. How much privacy will you trade for convenience? Let's talk in the comments.